Fog didn't fall in the mountains. It climbed. It crawled up the ravines like something alive, swallowing trees, rocks, and the thin dirt road that had guided the team through the high valley. At first it was only a veil, soft, almost harmless. Then it thickened until the world became a narrow tunnel of pale gray. Sergeant Mara Kessler had learned long ago that fog didn't just hide you. It hid everything. Distance, angles, time, and mistakes. She slowed her breathing and tasted cold metal in the air. The weather had shifted without warning. It always did up here. Somewhere behind the cloud wall, the sun was still rising, but the light that reached the valley felt old and weak, as if it had traveled too far to matter. Mara lay prone on shale and frozen earth, her rifle tucked tight against her shoulder. The weapon was familiar weight, steady, patient, honest. The fog made the barrel look longer than it was, like it belonged to a different place. Below her, the road cut through the valley like a scar. On a clear day, you could see the entire bend and the culge of stone where the cliff leaned over the path. You could mark the choke points, the firing lines, the dead zones. Today, she could barely see the road at all. A faint shape moved somewhere down there, just a smear in the mist, then disappeared. Mara waited. No panic, no rush. Waiting was part of the job. Waiting was the job, sometimes. Her radio crackled once, then went quiet again. The silence that followed wasn't natural. It was the kind of silence that happened when people were trying not to make a sound. Mara pressed her cheek against the stock and listened for anything that didn't belong. The scrape of boots on rock, the clink of equipment, the wrong kind of wind. Nothing. Then the radio hissed. Mara. The voice was faint, clipped by interference. Captain Doyle. Report. Mara didn't answer right away. She checked the fog again, scanning the valley in slow slices. The biggest trap in fog was imagination. Your brain would build enemies out of shadows if you let it. She kept her voice low. I'm eyes on, but visibility is trash. I can't confirm movement. Static. A pause. Then, copy. We're pushing to the rally point. Stay overwatch. She almost told him not to. Almost. Because she knew the route, knew the ridge lines, knew the way the valley forced vehicles and men to move like pieces on a board. If someone had planned this, the fog was a gift. But she wasn't paid for maybes. She was paid for decisions made with the information she had. Understood, she said. Overwatch. She adjusted the scope ring. Small movement, slow, controlled. Her gloves were stiff with cold, and her fingers ached as if the bones had been swapped for glass. She ignored it. Below, the faint smear returned, this time more than one. Shapes drifting along the road, half-formed ghosts. Her team. They moved in tight formation. Disciplined. Heads turning, weapons pointed into gray nothing. Mara felt an unexpected surge of pride. They were good. They were careful. That was what made the next moment feel like betrayal. A sound thumped through the fog, soft at first, almost like a distant door closing. Then another. Then a sharp crack. The valley answered with echoes. The fog carried the sound in strange ways, bending it, hiding direction. But Mara knew gunfire when she heard it. The cracks weren't warning shots. They were contact, clean, deliberate. Her heart tightened. She swung the scope a few degrees, scanning the ridgeline above the road. Nothing. Another crack. A brighter flash, muffled by fog. And then the dull whump of something bigger. An explosive charge or a grenade. Not huge. Enough to stall movement. The team below scattered toward cover that didn't exist. Mara's mouth went dry. The fog was no longer hiding them. It was trapping them. Mara to Doyle. She said into the radio, keeping her voice from rising. Contact. I repeat, contact. I can't see shooters. Sound is distorted. Static burst across the channel. Then Doyle, closer now, strained. Where? A sharp, ugly pop cut him off. The radio squealed with feedback and then went dead. Mara's stomach dropped. Not the kind of drop that came from fear. The kind that came from understanding a simple truth. The plan was broken. The line was cut, and she was alone on the ridge with eyes that couldn't see. She inhaled and let the air out slowly. Fog. Cold. Limited visibility. No comms. This was what training was for. Not the perfect missions. Those never happened. Training was for the moment when everything went wrong and you had to keep moving anyway. She flicked the radio switch. Tried again. Doyle. Respond. Nothing. She turned the dial. Checked a secondary frequency. Another burst of static. The mountain swallowed every attempt like it was eating her voice. Mara forced her attention back to the valley. The gunfire had become sporadic, short bursts, controlled. Someone down there was trying to conserve ammo. That sounded like her people, but it also sounded like a trap tightening. She lifted her head a fraction, risking exposure to get a better angle. The fog on the ridge was slightly thinner than in the valley, but not by much. The world was still a blank page, and she had to write survival onto it. She shifted backward an inch and felt loose stone roll under her knee. She froze. Waited. Nothing reacted. Slowly, she crawled to her left, toward a cluster of rocks where the ridge broke into jagged outcroppings. She'd marked it earlier as a fallback position, good cover, better line of sight on the lower bend. Now it was more than fallback. It was her last anchor. As she slid into the rocks, she caught a glimpse, brief, sharp, of movement through the fog near the road. A dark figure, too fast to identify, darting across the gap. Not her people. Different posture. Different speed. Enemy. She brought the scope up, tried to track the shape, but the fog swallowed it again. Damn. She whispered, not in anger, but in focus. Anger wasted energy. Focus saved it. She scanned the ridgeline opposite hers, where the mountainside rose like a wall. If shooters were up there, they'd have the high ground and the fog in their favor. They could fire and fade, fire and fade. She looked for the smallest tell, a flicker, a silhouette, a glint of glass. Nothing. But she didn't need to see everything. She only needed to see one thing. Mara adjusted her position and leaned the rifle onto a rock, creating a stable rest. She slowed her breath until her heartbeat softened into something she could work with. Her mind pulled up a mental map of the valley. The bend, the choke point, the narrow stretch where cover disappeared. If the ambush was organized, there would be a kill zone. There would be a place where the enemy wanted her team to be. And there would be a point where the enemy needed control. She studied the fog where the road disappeared. Then she saw it. Not a person, not a weapon. A brief flutter of fabric on the ridgeline. A fraction of movement that didn't match the wind. A signal. Someone up there was communicating, coordinating, holding a position. Mara's pulse steadied. She placed the crosshair on the spot, not where the fabric moved, but where the person would have to stand to make it move. She waited. Fog shifted. A faint outline formed. A shoulder, a head, an arm raised. Mara didn't fire. Not yet. Because in the valley below, her team was still moving. Still fighting. And she couldn't risk taking a shot that revealed her position unless it changed the entire board. She needed a shot that mattered. A shot that would buy time. A shot that would turn chaos into opportunity. She reached for the radio again, as if willing it to cooperate, then stopped. It wouldn't. So she made the decision she'd hoped she wouldn't have to make when she'd been briefed on the mission. She would hold the ridge alone, until the fog lifted, until the team broke free, until she ran out of ammo, or until the mountain took her voice for good. Below, another explosion rolled through the valley. Dust and fog rose together like a curtain. Mara tightened her grip and whispered the only promise that mattered. Not today. The fog thickened after the first explosion, as if the valley itself was closing its eyes. Mara felt the cold creep deeper into her bones. Not the sharp kind that hurt right away, but the slow, patient cold that dulled thought and stiffened muscle. The kind that punished hesitation. Below, the firefight settled into a rhythm. Short bursts. Pauses. Movement masked by mist. Someone was trying to control the tempo, and it wasn't her team. She tracked the road through the scope again. forcing her vision to ignore the gray noise. Training took over. Separate motion from shape, shape from intention. The fog blurred edges, but it couldn't erase patterns. Her team had taken cover behind a rock outcrop that offered more psychological comfort than real protection. The road there narrowed, forcing vehicles to bunch, exactly where an ambush would want them. She counted bodies. 1, 2, 3. Her chest tightened. They were down a man. No, two. One lay motionless near the lead vehicle, half covered by dust and fog. The other was moving, but wrong, dragging one leg, using his rifle as a crutch. Mara swallowed. She'd trained herself not to think in names. Names slowed reaction time. Names made you hesitate. But it was impossible not to recognize the way Walker moved, even at distance. Walker never limped. Until now. She reached for the radio again. Tried a different channel. Nothing but static and a low hum, like the mountain breathing into her ear. She was cut off, and the enemy knew it. A new crack split the fog, closer this time. A round snapped into the rock just below her position, sending stone chips into the air. Mara flinched back on instinct, then froze. They were probing, not shooting blind. Someone had triangulated her ridge. She slid backward, inch by inch, keeping her body low. Another round hit where she'd been moments earlier. Whoever was shooting wasn't guessing. They were patient, professional. Her fingers tightened on the rifle. She could return fire, but firing now would confirm her position completely. One sniper against multiple shooters in fog was a losing math problem. She needed to change the equation. Mara crawled along the ridge, using the terrain she'd memorized earlier. She'd studied this ground before dawn, marking every dip, every shadow, every place the rock rose just enough to break a silhouette. She reached a shallow depression and rolled into it, breathing hard despite herself. Her heart thudded against her ribs, loud enough that she wondered if it carried through the fog. She forced herself to slow down. Think. Below, the firing intensified. The enemy was tightening the noose, pushing her team toward the bend. If they reached it, they'd be pinned from 3 sides. She couldn't let that happen. Mara lifted her head just enough to peer through the scope again. Movement on the opposite ridge, clearer now. 2 figures, spaced apart. Spotters. Watching the valley, not her. They thought she'd relocated. Good. She adjusted the scope, dialing for distance, factoring wind she couldn't feel but could infer from drifting fog. The shot would be long. Difficult. Risky. But it would matter. Her finger rested on the trigger, pressure building in careful increments. She centered the crosshair on the lead spotter's chest, not because she wanted a kill, but because a miss would be useless. She exhaled. The rifle cracked. The sound punched through the fog, sharp and final. The recoil nudged her shoulder, familiar and grounding. She stayed on target, watching through the scope. The figure jerked and disappeared backward, swallowed by gray. No celebration. No pause. She shifted immediately, sliding to her right, as return fire snapped through the space she'd occupied. Rounds tore into rock, spraying fragments. One shard cut her cheek, hot then cold. She ignored it. Below, the effect was immediate. Enemy fire faltered, just for a second, but that second mattered. Her team surged forward, dragging the wounded man, repositioning behind better cover. Mara felt a brief, fierce relief. Then the radio crackled. Kessler. Walker's voice, strained but alive. If that was you, thank you. Her throat tightened. She didn't answer right away. Keep moving, she said finally. They're coordinating from the east ridge. You need to break contact before they reset. Static flared. Then Doyle's voice came through, weak but present. Mara, we lost comms. 2 wounded, ammo low. Mara closed her eyes for half a heartbeat. Ammo low. Of course. Fall back toward the narrow pass, she said. I'll cover. There was a pause. Then Doyle. Negative. That leaves you exposed. She opened her eyes and looked into the fog. I already am. Silence. Not static this time, decision. Then, copy. We move on your mark. Mara adjusted her position again, checking her remaining rounds. She'd fired one. That left her with 6 in the magazine, one chambered, and another mag tucked into her vest. Not enough for a prolonged fight. Enough to delay. She scanned the ridgeline. The enemy was adapting now, spreading out, changing angles. They'd realized they weren't dealing with a random overwatch. They were dealing with someone who knew how to hurt them. She fired again, this time not at a person, but at the rock near a cluster of movement. The round sparked and sent debris flying. It wasn't lethal, but it was loud. It told a story. There is a sniper here, and she's watching. Enemy fire shifted toward her ridge in response, pulling pressure off the valley below. Exactly what she wanted. Another explosion boomed, closer this time. The shockwave rattled the rocks around her, knocking loose dust that coated her tongue. She coughed once, quietly, then pressed her face into the cold earth. "Mara," Doyle said over the radio. "We're moving." "Now," she replied. She fired again, another deliberate shot, another controlled breath. One of the enemy figures dropped, not dead but wounded, clutching his shoulder. She didn't linger. Rounds snapped past her head. One slammed into the rock inches from her rifle barrel, showering her in grit. She felt a sharp pain in her forearm and sucked in air through clenched teeth. Blood seeped through the fabric of her sleeve, dark against gray. Not bad. Not yet. She shifted position again, crawling lower on the ridge. Her arm burned, muscles protesting. Fatigue was creeping in now, heavy and insistent. Below, the fog swallowed the last of her team as they retreated toward the pass. She lost sight of them completely. For a moment, panic flared. Then she crushed it. They were moving. That was enough. Her job wasn't to survive the mountain. It was to keep the enemy busy long enough that the mountain didn't kill her team. She checked her ammo again. 4 rounds left. Her radio crackled once more, then went silent for good. Mara lay alone on the ridge, bleeding, cold, and nearly out of time. The fog pressed closer, thick as wool, and the enemy began to climb. Night didn't arrive all at once. It seeped in through the fog, darkening it shade by shade until the valley became something else entirely. A hollow space without edges, without distance, without mercy. Sound changed in the dark. It traveled farther, then vanished without warning. Footsteps could be 10 meters away or 100. Breathing might belong to you, or someone else. Mara lay pressed against the cold slope, her cheek numb, her injured arm wrapped tight, with a strip torn from her sleeve. The bleeding had slowed, but the pain had sharpened, settling deep and constant. She checked her rifle again. 2 rounds. That was it. No more magazines. No more margin for error. 2 decisions left. The enemy knew it was night. They knew what that meant. They stopped firing. Silence returned, heavy and deliberate. Mara hated the silence more than the gunfire. Gunfire told you where the threat was. Silence let it move. She shifted slightly and winced as her forearm protested. Her fingers were stiff now, clumsy. She flexed them slowly, forcing blood back into the joints. Losing dexterity meant losing the rifle. Losing the rifle meant losing everything. She angled her head, listening. There, stone against stone. Careless? No. Controlled. Someone testing footing on the ridge below her position. They were climbing, not rushing. They had time. Mara swallowed and tasted iron. Her throat was raw from breathing cold air and shouting orders she wasn't sure anyone still heard. She thought of the team, Walker's limp, Doyle's calm voice strained thin. If they made the pass, they'd have a chance. If they didn't, she cut the thought off. Speculation was a luxury she couldn't afford. Her radio lay silent against her chest. She pressed the transmit button anyway, not because she expected an answer, but because the act itself anchored her. Ridge Overwatch, she whispered. Still holding. Static answered her. She closed her eyes for a second longer than she meant to. When she opened them again, the fog had shifted just enough to reveal movement. A shape, low and cautious, climbing toward her from the right. Close. Too close. Her heart hammered. She raised the rifle, lining up the shot as smoothly as her body would allow. Then she stopped. The figure wasn't alone. Another shadow moved behind it. And another. 3. She had 2 rounds. Her hands trembled, not from fear, but from exhaustion. The kind that hollowed you out and left you slow, uncertain. She fought it, breathing through clenched teeth. Think. She scanned the ridge, searching for something, anything, that could tip the balance. The rocks offered cover, but not escape. The slope dropped steeply behind her, a fall that would break bones at best. She was cornered. For the first time since the ambush began, the thought crept in uninvited. This is where it ends. It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't loud. It was quiet acceptance, cold and heavy. Mara pressed her forehead into the dirt and let herself feel it for one breath. Just one. Then she lifted her head. No, not like this. She shifted her weight and glanced down the slope, following the line of the ridge. Her eyes caught on something she'd marked hours ago and dismissed as irrelevant. A narrow cut in the rock, a natural fracture running down the face of the mountain. Steep, unstable, invisible from below unless you knew it was there. It wasn't a path. It was a risk. Her pulse quickened, not with panic, but with calculation. If she moved now, silently, she might reach the fracture before they closed the distance. If she slipped. She didn't finish the thought. Mara eased backward, inch by inch, keeping her profile low. The enemy's shapes continued upward, slow and methodical, unaware. She reached the edge of the fracture and peered down. Darkness swallowed the slope, but she could make out just enough to see where the rock might hold. She slung the rifle across her back, securing it tight. Losing it would mean losing the last 2 rounds, and she wasn't ready for that yet. She took one last look toward the valley. Fog. Silence. Her team was gone. Good. Mara began her descent. The first step sent a small cascade of stone clattering down the slope. She froze, heart pounding, every muscle locked. The sound echoed briefly, then died in the fog. No reaction. She continued, moving with painful slowness, testing each foothold before committing her weight. Her injured arm screamed in protest, but she ignored it, focusing on balance, on pressure, on control. Halfway down, her boot slipped. She gasped as her body lurched forward, arms flailing. She slammed into the rock hard enough to knock the air from her lungs, pain exploding through her ribs. She bit down on a cry and tasted blood. For a moment, she couldn't move. She lay there, cheek pressed against stone, vision swimming. The cold crept deeper, wrapping around her chest, her legs, her thoughts. Get up. The command came from somewhere distant, buried under fatigue and pain. She didn't answer it. Not at first. Then the sound reached her ears again, closer now. Boots. Above her. They'd reached her last position. Mara forced her eyes open and dragged herself upright. Her body protested every movement, but fear sharpened her focus. She reached the bottom of the fracture and pressed herself into the shadow it cast. The fog was thinner here, wind-cut and restless. She pulled the rifle free and checked it. 2 rounds. She steadied herself against the rock, peering upward. A figure appeared at the top of the fracture, silhouetted against faint starlight. He paused, scanning, unsure. Mara raised the rifle and settled the crosshair on his center mass. She didn't hesitate. The shot cracked through the night, echoing off stone. The figure dropped out of sight with a cry cut short. Chaos followed. Shouts. Movement. Gunfire spraying blindly into the dark. Mara fired her second round, aiming not to kill but to mislead. Ricochet, spark, confusion. Then she ran. Her legs burned as she pushed forward, stumbling through fog and darkness, away from the ridge, away from the valley, away from the fight. Behind her, the mountain roared with sound. Ahead, there was only night, and a single, fragile truth. She was still alive. For now. Morning arrived without ceremony. The fog didn't vanish. It thinned, slowly, reluctantly, as if the valley itself needed time to remember what it was supposed to look like. Pale light filtered through the clouds, revealing shapes that had been hidden all night. Broken rock, twisted metal, dark stains on the road below. Mara woke face down in gravel. For a moment, she didn't know where she was. Pain existed before memory, sharp in her ribs, dull in her arm, heavy in her legs. She tried to push herself up and failed, breath leaving her in a harsh gasp. She lay still, counting breaths. 1, 2. The fog was lighter here, the air cold but clean. No gunfire. No shouting. Just wind brushing against stone. She rolled onto her side and winced as her ribs protested. Her rifle lay a few feet away, exactly where she remembered dropping it when her legs finally gave out. That alone told her she hadn't been found in the night. She was still alone. Mara reached for the radio, fingers clumsy and numb. She pressed the button. Static. She tried again, changing frequency, adjusting the antenna. Kessler. Her heart jumped. She pressed the button hard. This is Kessler. I'm alive. The pause that followed stretched thin. Then Doyle's voice came through, hoarse but steady. Say again. I'm alive, she repeated. Injured but mobile. A breath on the other end of the line. Relief, unguarded. Copy. We broke contact at dawn. Air is inbound. Mark your position. Mara closed her eyes. Just for a second. Negative on marking, she said. I'm off the ridge. Give me grid. I'll move. There was another pause. Then, you don't have to prove anything, Sergeant. She smiled faintly despite the pain. Not trying to. She dragged herself upright, leaning heavily on the rifle. The world tilted, then steadied. Her vision blurred at the edges, but she forced herself to focus. As she moved toward the extraction point, the valley revealed itself piece by piece. Burned-out equipment near the road. Fresh scars where explosions had torn into rock. Spent casings scattered like dull brass leaves. She didn't look for bodies. She didn't need to. An hour later, the thump of rotor blades echoed through the mountains. The sound felt unreal at first, too loud, too alive after the night's silence. Mara stepped into the clearing as the helicopter descended, dust and fog swirling together. Walker was the first to jump down. He limped toward her, grinning despite the bandage around his leg. You look like hell. She nodded. You should see the other guy. Doyle followed, his face lined with exhaustion and something else, something heavier. He stopped in front of her and studied her for a long moment. You held them, he said quietly. Mara shrugged. The motion sent pain through her shoulder. Long enough. The medic reached her and guided her toward the aircraft. As they lifted her inside, she caught a final glimpse of the ridge, the fog thinning now, the rocks bare and ordinary in daylight. It looked smaller than it had at night, less like a monster, more like a place. The helicopter lifted off, carrying her away from the valley. Below, the road curved out of sight, silent and empty again. Mara leaned back against the bulkhead and closed her eyes. She didn't think about the shots she'd fired. She didn't think about the men who wouldn't climb that ridge again. She thought about timing, about patience, about the thin line between staying and leaving. Later, in a quiet room with white walls and steady light, someone would ask her what happened up there. They would want details, numbers, a clean sequence of events. She would give them what they needed. But the truth, the real truth, was simpler than any report. She'd stayed when leaving was easier. She'd waited when rushing would have been fatal. And when the fog finally lifted, the mission wasn't remembered for how loud it had been, but for how close it came to disappearing entirely. If you enjoyed this story, subscribe to Epic Recon Stories. Here we tell the missions that never made the headlines, the decisions made in silence, and the people who carried them. More stories are coming soon.